Hello, everybody, or good morning. Welcome to this morning's stream on data, particularly. So, data in the sense of how can it help us engage with the learning population that we have, and also how it can drive business results. I think I want to make that distinction actually quite early on that often data is looked at in the L&D space as a justification for why we do training. Like, does it drive business performance? Do we see an improvement to the bottom line? Are we more efficient? Those kind of statistics. But data is useful at all stages of the learning process. Engaging with learners, as they go through the content that we've created for them, but also in terms of how they're navigating through the portals that we provide, how we're connecting to them outside of the controlled L&D space of an LMS or LXP, and how we're marketing content to them. So today, what I'd like to do is kind of go through that journey of a learner from where their first engagement with, I say L&D, but a piece of L&D content might be, and move all the way through to the end point, which is some sort of business result. I'm conscious that what we had a webinar last week, which was great, with Lauren Lars Hoffman and my colleague Chris Cameron, talking about data, and really interesting topic, and a really good discussion. So I'd encourage anybody that is watching this to also go and look at that webinar. This will cover some slightly different topics, touch on some different points, and particularly at the front end about the engagement piece, again, because so many people focus on the ROI side of things. This is really going to help, I think, particularly in the environment we find ourselves, where we're pushing out content and then we're looking at going, well, is that resonating? Are people engaging with the stuff I'm sending out? Is it relevant to them? And also, how can we just drive up the participation and the engagement with the content in the first instance? So these are the kind of things that we're going to cover today. I apologise, my allergies are pretty bad today, so I've got a weird little frog in my throat, so I might have to clear my throat occasionally. I'll try and put myself on mute if needs be. So where do I want to start? Well, actually, I want to start with something that a piece of research, or at least a statement that I've seen an organisation who collect loads and loads of data around learning. This organisation's great for insight when it comes to the L&D function within organisations. And what I'd like to show you here is some research, or well, at least some of the findings from that research from Fosway. I think everybody knows Fosway, but if you don't, go and look at their site. They've got huge amounts of information, grids on who best platform are, where best content's coming from. Really good resource. And I've lucky enough to have a number of times have spoken with David Perring, and he may recognise this content as some of his, so I must give him credit here. But what's interesting for me is these reasons for dissatisfaction with L&D. Not knowing the customer, not thinking about how continuous learning really works, and not focusing on measuring results. Now, I think I said it on a previous stream, but to me, data, I did with Laura the other week. Data to me is not just numbers. It's not just a case of saying someone's filled in this form or they've only visited this page 5 times as opposed to 50 times. For me, data is any information that we can gather. So not knowing their customers, to me, I translate that to not having enough data around what our customers need. And customers in this situation, obviously, is the workforce from an L&D perspective. Not thinking about how continuous learning really works. Now you go, well, where's the data in that? Well, the reality is, and we'll touch on it, but the data is showing the engagement across that journey of learning. So continuous learning, it's great from an instructional design perspective to set that up and to have that in mind. But if you set out a program of learning and people aren't actually engaging with that on an ongoing basis, it's not continuous learning, even if you decided that it was going to be that. At the end of the day, the metrics will bear the reality. And 3, they're not focused on measuring results. And this is this ROI piece. But results can also be engagement. It can be advocacy for L&D, recognition that the L&D function is delivering back to the business from not just a a bottom line perspective, but particularly in this current time of COVID, but actually delivering a sense of community and sense of helping individuals build self-worth, where actually at times we are all isolated, whether we're like self-isolating at home, alone, or just the fact that we're not talking to colleagues in the same way that we were doing before. We haven't got that face-to-face connection. So L&D are really important at the moment. So all these areas I think data can touch on. What I don't think data is, and I'm really this is a big caveat for the entire stream today. For me, data is not the answer, as in the holy grail. Capturing data will not provide you the solution. What it does is provide you with a light to shine on the problem, or a lens by which you can look through at a specific problem or challenge. So in other words, it provides clarity or focus. What it doesn't do is say, well, here, we've looked at the data and we've found this. Great, so what? And just because you found that and implemented a solution doesn't mean that solution will be right. You've got to keep measuring that to see that that's correct. It's a continuous process. And particularly when we're looking at the use of platforms nowadays and the way that people use technology, that data capture process has to be fluid. It has to be fluid, continuous, and regular. You cannot stop with that because things can change, in a heartbeat. I know the current situation with Corona has been, a stark example of this. But even before that, there's been this shift, as I showed on the last stream with some of the data around Teams and Slack, that people are moving, or organisations are shifting the way they work. Well, that's going to have an impact on the way people learn or engage with software and platforms that exist within the business. So always got to be measuring. So I'm going to think about, let's start at the journey from a perspective of, I'm an individual in the business. I've not been yet engaged by L&D on a specific topic, for example. So one of the first ways that I would start to be capturing data about my learners and improving engagement is, how do I market my content? How do I reach out to people and make people aware of what's possible on the learning platform? We spend a lot of money invested in either time, resource, or software to build like wide sprawling LMSs, LXPs, social learning tools, things like that. But actually, we've got to get people to the platform. I've seen an uptick in it, but I would encourage people to do more of it. And I've said this on previous streams, of using marketing tools to engage with their population. And the reason I say that is because marketing are great at understanding what their discrete audiences are doing. So typically, or at least historically, I've seen it where we have a piece of content. Let's say we've created, again, a leadership program or something of that nature, and we want to push it out to that specific audience. Most of the time what happens is that comes out from a centralized function, or maybe some software that exists on the LMS itself, where we message the entire audience that's relevant to. That's great, and it will give you some degree of data. But wouldn't it be better to use a marketing tool, which will exist in your business, because every business has marketing tools inside of it, and use that tool to create a message that you can track the engagement with to a greater extent? So by that I mean, everyone's had one of these emails come into their inbox from a marketing company trying to sell them something, or you've signed up to something on a company on Amazon, or your insurance provider or something like that. But we get those repeat emails, and in those they are tracking what you click on, if you've opened it, the number of times you've opened it, and it's not just the fact you've clicked on something, it's what inside that email you've clicked on. If there's a video, if there's a hyperlink, they know what you're clicking on, and they will use that information to do a number of things. First of all, it's confirmation of the port of the way that that the message is hitting home and it's been engaged with. That's number one. So the metrics around open rate and the number of opens is important there. But the clicking is important because it's telling them how people are engaging inside of that email. So if you include a video, for example, and let's, for argument's sake, say, and this would be a great statistic, 95% of the people watch the video who open the email, then you know in that situation that video is doing really well. There's something about the way that you've constructed your message and the way that you have positioned that video inside of that email content that is resonating with people and making them click. Could be the way the image looks, the thumbnail on the video before it starts. It could be the way you've titled it, but something there is making it work. And what marketing will do is something called A/B testing, where they might have a different version of that email with the same video, but position it in a different way. And that might get fewer number of hits, let's say 65%. So what that's telling them is that if we want to engage with our learners and we want to make sure that we're publicizing our content the best way, we'll use the first version, which has a 95% success rate over the second version. And the same is true of hyperlinks. If people click on links or people don't click on links, people know, or the marketing function would know how, essentially how people are navigating in their content. What's really, really important for that, for L&D, is if you're putting out a newsletter which has got multiple pieces of content in it, you know what people are clicking on. If you are specifically trying to push a certain piece of content, you can do various tests with different ways of marketing that to see which of those has the most resonance within your target audience. It could be that you actually have to change the message depending upon the audience. So let's say a few years ago we had GDPR. Obviously it was compulsory training, but there still had to be a degree of advocacy built up around GDPR and encouragement for people to get to platform and do the content. What worked in one department, let's say IT, might have been different to that in, say, HR or in sales. They may have all needed a subtly different message, but you would have known that if you were capturing information. And currently, a lot of L&D functions do not use tools like that in order to understand, even before someone gets to platform, what people want and require. Now, I'm not going to go into all the other avenues that you could get to someone beforehand, but I just wanted to use that as an example. But by way of, as another one at a very high level, think about things like learning portals that we have, intranets that we have, or things like Slack and Teams. They are all producing their own unique data sets. Some of them more in depth than others, some of them easy to understand behavior, some of them maybe easier to understand interest, like where people are using search engines in platforms. But the point is, there are lots of different data resources prior to anybody ever getting to the L&D platform that you can use to understand what will resonate with your learning audience. So use it. So let's say I've clicked on one of those links. Let's say I clicked on the video and I was taken to a piece of content, taken to a content hub. Not necessarily the content itself, but I've said, okay, well, I'm going to go into my LMS, my LXP now, and I'm going to look at content. I'm going to look at what's there. So then we're looking at things. So we're on platform now. What data do we capture on platform? And this will vary greatly. But let me give you some examples of what's possible. So most people will understand the term Google Analytics. Really, really useful tool in understanding the flow of an individual or a group of people through the platform. One of the best tools that it has in there, and again used by marketeers when it comes to websites, is there is a tool, and I've forgotten its name. It's just literally escaped me. It doesn't matter, but there's a tool in there, and I'll post up in the comments afterwards. But there's a tool that shows you the flow of people through your platform and the pages that they hit. Those kind of tools are invaluable because again they're showing you behavior. It's the hardest thing historically that's been able to track how are people engaging. So on platform, I would ensure that analytics is installed from a Google perspective, because the marketing tools would be hugely valuable there in understanding behavior, understanding where people click, and the routes in and out of platform. So let me give you some examples. I go onto a landing page and it will track from that point where I go through the site. So I might go from a landing page to my learning area, and I might go from my learning into a piece of content, which then takes me to another piece of content, and then that I might leave the platform. That flow would have been tracked. We also have the ability on platform with newer tracking methods of data capture, such as XAPI, to understand and write statements about what people are doing on platform, visiting pages, subscribing to courses or enrolling in courses, Those kind of things, and many more besides, but those kind of things are hugely important as well, because they're showing another form of interaction that you may not necessarily always get with Google Analytics, which are more platform specific. And obviously Google Analytics is more about understanding the flow through the page structure rather than necessarily the content itself, although you can actually get statistics on the content on those discrete pages. My point being is, again, there are tools out there giving us data on how we can understand movement through our platforms. Now, you're probably thinking, well, this is hugely complex. I'm never going to get this. The reality is it's not. It's hugely simple. Emailing tools are, once you have them set up, and even before that, they're very much a case nowadays of click and play. There are systems designed to help you with that process of what I call what's called A/B testing. Likewise on platform, Google Analytics does not have to be a big process. You will have people in your organization that are utilizing Google Analytics on your company website or on other portals that you have. Utilize them. Go and have a bit of outreach. There's no issue with, in my opinion, with learning going outside of the realms of their current capability set and going out to other departments and using their technical expertise or subject matter expertise. To help with this data capture process. We can't be expected to do everything. We wouldn't expect our learners to be able to do everything, so nor should we. But there are also lots of guides out there on how you might do those sorts of things. But in terms of integration into platform like Google Analytics, most platforms allow that. It's very simple. It's literally a code you put on and it starts tracking data, and that data starts to filter through after. It varies, but 24 hours or so, and you should start to see some behavioural data on platform. So hugely beneficial. Okay, so what kind of statistics would I be thinking about? I'm going to stay here in the engagement piece before we've even got to content. What kind of things would we look for from an instructional design perspective? Instructional design? Sorry, I didn't say that. From an engagement perspective. So, great examples here. When we build platforms at Valamis, we're looking, our UX design team spent a lot of time understanding how people navigate through content. So they've put a lot of time and effort into crafting views and working what needs to be available to people on the certain views that we have on our platform. The way we're able to do that is through tracking of data. So typically, let's say, for example, a platform, you want to get people to content as quickly as possible. You want to minimize those number of clicks. So if I was trying to measure or understand engagement of my learner audience, I'd probably be looking at things like, how long does it take for someone to enter onto the platform and then move to a piece of content and consume it? How many things do they click on prior to getting to that piece of content? Because ultimately, what you want them to be doing is getting the piece of content, improving their skills and capabilities, and then getting back to work. And if they're not doing that, if they're milling around on the platform for hours on end, then there's an argument to say that the learning on there isn't doing the job it should be doing, which is about obviously improving business performance there, personal business performance. So I think so there's one example. There's one statistic that I would use. So how the time that people are taking or spending on platform for accessing content. I'd also want to look at the types of things that people are utilizing. So let's say on a platform you have a My Learning page, which a lot of platforms do. So a summary of studies where they can pick up where they've left off, or they can look at past certificates they've earned, things like that. How many people actually visit those? How many people are using those on a regular basis to understand where they are and to benchmark and think, right, now where do I need to go next? Are they looking at, say, a competency matrix on the platform? Those kind of tools where it's kind of a moment to stop and reflect on where you are and then continue with learning. Are they being used? If they are, and they're being used extensively, it might be worth considering adding functionality to those areas. So this is where we're getting into how I would drive engagement, because I would be saying, well, if people are interested in where their learning's at and the badges they've earned and maybe what their peers are doing, then let's give them more of that functionality. Let's enable them to have a greater understanding of that and therefore increase the amount that they're engaging with platform. What I'm not doing is saying let's bombard them with so much information they either don't know what to do with it or they spend forever looking at it. What I'm saying is there's an opportunity there to further engage. Subtle things might work as well. So let's think about it. For my learning page, if you have something like that on platform and people are going there, but at the moment it's all historical data, but you know people navigate to that page, why not put something on there that is then going to start pushing content? So maybe it's a subtle, small, maybe recommendation feed or something of that nature that's saying, look, here's like, this is what you've been learning. We noticed that you've done learning in this area. And this little feed of things is going to give you some more content around that topic area that you went through. And the reason that I say I'd put it on that page, even though it's the My Learning space, is the fact that it's a place where people are going to and using. So, you're not forcing them to a point on the site where they're never accessing. You're not trying to corral them into a space that they're not used to or wanting to go. What you're doing is you're understanding that they're using that space, if that's the space that they're using, and you're thinking, right, how can I leverage the fact that X number of people go to this point to better, and how am I leveraging that to better push content? That's how I'd be thinking about it from a platform perspective. And there are lots of little things, but for me, it's about where are people going and how can I craft my message to suit them? And that's going to be a recurring theme through this is where are they and is my message resonating? Is my content resonating? So let's move on to content. And before I do, I'd love it if anybody could post into the chat any questions, thoughts on what we've discussed so far and anywhere we'd like to go with this. I appreciate I'm going at a fair pace here with these various pieces, but data's a big topic and there's a lot to cover. But any thoughts, feelings, just please post them up in the comments. Let me know, it'd be great. Where were we at in terms of, we were going to move on to content, weren't we? So let me just pull up some slides here that I was going to show. I'll show those later, actually, thinking about it. I'll show those later. So content-wise, what are we measuring in content? Now, we've been used to SCORM packages for years, showing us, when someone started a piece of training, when someone finished it. But for me, it's not enough. XAPI or Tin Can API, depending upon the terminology that you use, it's so much better at capturing data. It's so much more in depth about understanding what people are doing. Sorry, I just had a question from Phil. I'll come back to what I was talking about. Let's just talk to Phil there. When is it important to use data science to understand your employees' engagement rather than just sending out a survey? Okay, really good question. I think that's, for me, it's down, for me, the terms are not, they're not like, I don't see them as mutually exclusive. So data science to me, let's take this. So data science is essentially the reading, potentially manipulation of multiple data sets, but the reading of data to understand, just understand more about that audience or the data that the data was collected on. So data science can be just a survey, in my opinion, if that's one of your data sets. It doesn't have to be anything. It doesn't have to be anything more complex than that. But if we're talking about the data science in terms of predictive analytics or the space where we're capturing multiple data sources and using various more complex ways of analysis, then I think for me it's about the appropriateness of applying that resource. A survey, if done well, can be very, very effective, but a survey also has a degree of bias on it. I've constructed hundreds of surveys and psychometric type profiles in my time, earlier in my career, and one thing I would say is that it's not impossible, but it's very hard to remove bias from those, because when you're doing a survey or something like that, people know that they're being surveyed. I always use an example of, if I'm testing people on compliance training after they've just been through compliance training, they know what they need to answer. Test them in the real world environment with something that's more abstract or obscure, and will they be able to apply the principles of the training that they went through? That's a better measure. And the reason that I give an example is because one of those is a survey or a quiz or a test taken in the moment, but you know what you're being assessed on. You know that that's happening, and it's an unconscious or sometimes even conscious bias. Whereas if you're taking data from the real world, then you there's a higher likelihood that isn't biased by a knowledge of being monitored. It's there obviously there's bias and influence from other areas, less controlled an environment, so there's greater outside factors potentially. But surveys are an excellent tool, and for me, it's about what's fit for purpose. So if I was trying to understand the needs of so let's take platform. If I was trying to understand what people want on their platform, I'd survey them, but I probably wouldn't only survey them. And the reason for that is they only know, or they only want what they know they can have. So are people aware that they can have, highly intelligent, or complex AI systems driving content to them based upon, a multitude of factors in their learning profile? Do they know that? I don't know if they do. Do they know they can integrate chatbots and things like that into their other tools that they use on a daily basis, like Teams and Slack and Salesforce and things like that? Do they know that that's possible, and that learning can be quite literally at their fingertips? So surveys are great. You've got to ask the right questions and you've got to frame them in the right way. But I'd also couple that with the data. Asking someone what they want and then it not bear out in the data is a perfect example. And I've seen it a lot where people say request more social features, but they're not using the social features that exist on platform. Now that might be for another reason, but the point is that they're not doing it. So for me, it's always about, if you can capture information, it doesn't cost too much time and effort to do so against the task that you're trying to, or against the performance improvement you're trying to achieve, then it's about the level of appropriateness for me. But great question. Jumping back to back into the content now. So content perspective, what's about XAPI. So XAPI is tracking at a much greater level of detail. We know not only just the fact that someone started or completed a piece of training, but we know what in the training that they navigated to, which, how many pages out of a 50-page PDF did they actually consume? What quiz question or test question did they answer, and how did they answer it? Not just that they got it wrong or right. In video content in particular, and when we've spoken about this on other streams about how video is so widely used, but the level of data capture on video now that's possible is amazing. We know when people can start, stop. We know when they fast forward through a piece of content. And a really relevant example is, say, taking a piece of content where we've created a 15-minute video, and we know if we can track the data inside of it, which we can do with XAPI, we would know that someone watched, or an audience watched, the first 3 minutes and the last 2 minutes of a 15-minute video. And there's a middle chunk there of 10 minutes that they didn't consume. So they missed all that content. And from an instructional design perspective, and again, back to how do we engage with learners better, that's hugely valuable information. I would immediately look at that and go, I reckon we should chunk the video down. Or is the video correct? There's a couple of different points of view there. But I would look at it and say, well, assuming the content's correct, because we didn't create that for no reason whatsoever, rather than make a 15-minute video, let's make 5 3-minute videos and have that as a series. And let's see what the engagement level's like on that. Because maybe people haven't got enough time to watch video for 15 minutes and that's why they're skipping through it. So it's a really good example there of how XAPI can really give you a better understanding and a more meaningful understanding of what people are doing within the content. Up until recently, that wasn't possible. If we're also taking XAPI even one stage further, that it's possible to have inputs from outside of the learning platform filter back. I'll probably touch on this more about external data sources, but just know that when we're talking about the second point from Fosway there about continuous learning, it is possible to take feeds from other systems and feed that into your learning record store and use it as evidence of capability or performance improvement. Let's say your piece of training deals with a specific task on a piece of software. Maybe it's data entry into some sort of system that you use for, say, customer management. And your customer management system is set up to talk to your LMS or LXP. You could push the data to say, yep, this person now has done this action 10 times. It aligns to this piece of training they're enrolled in, and it would track and say, yep, now we've evidenced it. They get a tick in the box in their learning record store for that part of the learning puzzle, because another platform is informed about the fact that someone has been able to do that 10, 20, whatever the threshold is, number of times. That is possible. It's not widely used, but it's possible. And I think moving forward, we'll see that smarter integration of business platforms, because it's performance review in the moment and directly linked to the learning platform and the content that people are consuming. Anything else on the engagement side of things? Yeah, so I suppose then we're looking at things content-wise, like not just like the time they're spending in it, but what specific bits that they are clicking on. So what is, are people connecting with more video content? As we suspect they probably are. But what about the PDFs that we've put up, the infographics, the micro-learning? The tagged content that we have on platform, what are people navigating to? And is that different in different audiences? Again, you might find that certain people, let's say salespeople who argue they're time poor, everybody does, but let's say salespeople, they might want smaller chunk down content, whereas you might get people that are very technical or in more technical roles that need a 50-page document, white paper, FAQ, whatever you want to call it, whatever it is. They might need that level of depth because that's something that is relevant to them and meaningful, and that's the way they like to consume learning. We shouldn't be looking at modality and the content that we provide as necessarily the only way. There's only one way to do it. We should be thinking about what is the best modalities, I've said on other streams, to reach my audience, and we can only do that by looking at the data of people choosing and also operating inside of that content. So I'm now a learner. I've been marketed to. I've clicked on an email. I've jumped a platform. I've been pushed some more content, or I've navigated the content through the platform, and all the time I've been tracked. I'm in the content. I've consumed it. I've gone through it. I've completed tests. So I've still been tracked. Then the link is, well, so the question is, so what? We talked about. We talked at the start of the stream about how most of the time it focuses on business results, and maybe this is the right point to say that, but I still think it's, come back. This is also about engagement. So from the business results perspective, we're now looking at, and I'm going to show you a slide here. Well, actually, I say a slide, but it's actually a screen grab from our platform showing some of the data capture that's now possible. Let me just move to that now real quick. So what you can see on screen here is a top side of a report that we can build in platform. We're doing this using data sources inside of the platform, and we're doing it using data sources outside of the platform. Bear in mind, this is dummy data, as probably might be obvious from the fact that this is Acme branded site. But just bear in mind the fact that this external and internal meaning learning management system, or LXP data source, is entirely possible, and having multiple external data sources is no issue whatsoever. But what this is providing us is the option to directly and almost live report against what's going on in platform, and then the effect it's having on the business. So in this one, we're looking at incidents, for example, from an IT perspective, around viruses and minor and major incidents that take place within an organization. And also the training that people are going through, in relation to IT security. So there's a graph there on the ring graph on the left showing the completion rate, which is sitting somewhere, I would argue, around about 85% completion. And when we've got the number of incidents on the larger ring there, by way of breakdown of as percentage for each of those corresponding areas of major virus and major, minor, and virus. On the next slide, though, what we have is, if you bear with me while I just pull it up, we have, this is the lower end of that graph, a lower end of that page. We've got more information here, and what this information is showing is a geographic spread on the map. And probably the more interesting graph, in my opinion, is the one here we've got on the showing the correlation between the training and the security incidents. So it's taking that data from those two ring graphs above, but then mapping them against each other over time. And again, I said this is dummy data, but this is the kind of thing you'd expect to see, where the number of instances is higher at the start, and then as the training progresses, which is the line there, you start to see the train decrease. We're all used to looking at graphs like this now, thanks to the current pandemic. So this kind of stuff should be should be easy for everybody to understand now. But no, seriously, I think we are when we're looking at this kind of data, this is hugely powerful. This is in the moment. This is live data that's coming from other systems in the business, and for the organisation, particularly those at senior leadership levels, this is a much more palatable way to receive information. But we can also do this, we can produce reports like this looking at the engagement across the site or across other platforms to understand how our people are navigating across our systems. So it isn't just a case of saying, well, this is looking at, numbers and saying, well, the security instance has gone down, or we've sold more, or we've reduced cost or improved process. It could also be, you can produce graphs around what's our engagement like? What's our employee retention data like? And what part is L&D playing in that retention of those employees? These more complex data sets, which rely on more than one source, are much better than us just going, well, how many learners have we had on platform today? And how many hours of training have we delivered? This is meaningful data as opposed to those others that are, let's just call them headline statistics, but they don't tell us anything about how we can utilize that information more to better what we do. A perfect example with this is if we hadn't seen the graph having an effect, very quickly you would start to realize that, okay, whatever IT training we have around security here, it isn't doing the job. It's not reducing the number of security risks. Too often in L&D, I've seen programs of learning rolled out over a 6 or 12-month time period, and them only measured at the end. This is measuring it, on a daily basis to say, well, we've now had like 50% of our cohort go through this training, and this is the results that we're seeing. That's powerful, hugely powerful. I see a question in the chat again from Phil. What happens with large corporations when you get confusing or conflicting results from XAPI data? That's a good question. If I was seeing conflicting results, there's a couple of things I would look at. So let's assume there's audience. In fact, I'm going to come back to that, Phil. Let me come back to that about once I've finished this topic here, because I'm conscious of getting a bit jumbled with viewpoints. And I've almost finished on this point. So what I'm saying here is I don't want to labour on the business outcomes piece, because a lot of people do that. But just think about using tools like this. This is a data visualization tool. This one's free and open source. There are lots out there like SciSense and Power BI and I've forgotten. I just had one. It's gone in my head, but it doesn't matter. There are lots of tools out there for data visualization. You will probably have people in your organization that are doing the data visualization or the analytics. So utilize them. Again, like marketing, utilize that resource if you have it. But also good learning providers should be looking at this and helping you with that process of understanding the benefit of the learning. Hugely powerful stuff. And the ability on here, and you may have noticed it on the previous image I showed, but to filter and sort and restrict that audience view in the moment to manipulate that data in a dashboard view, much more powerful. But I'm sure a lot of people are already moving to these in other areas of the business, but in learning, this is something that I would really, really recommend. And as I say, this data can be aligned to engagement. So all the way through the piece here, we can say every single step of the puzzle that we have. So after they've gone through a training, as they're going through it, before they even get to it, you can measure, assess, and understand that to drive engagement, understand that data. So going back to Phil's point, XAPI. If I was seeing confusing or conflicting results in XAPI, I'm going to assume here that what you mean is for like some people are utilizing let's say in a piece of content, some people are going through it, some people aren't going through it, or on platforms, some people are navigating to a page and some people aren't in a discrete audience. In that situation, I don't think that's so let's just say it's varied. There's lack of a pattern. Okay, let's give it that term, or a lack of correlation. To me, that's saying. What it's saying is that maybe it's a hugely individual audience you're looking at. So the first thing I think about is what size is the data set that I have? Am I looking at this platform wide? And if I am and I'm seeing that spread, is it different in discrete audiences? So let's filter by, say, maybe job role, or filter by business unit or something like that to get essentially start chunking down. And I'd probably go into like larger chunks, maybe geography's built into it, but looking at it from different perspectives to say, can I see correlation when I start filtering the data into more discrete buckets of of classification? I would probably find that does happen. There would start to be some correlation, just going on what I've seen historically in my time with an L&D. But let's assume that isn't the case, or that you don't have the ability to re-chunk down like that. So let's think about it. So let's say you have got a broad spectrum on the site. What that shows to me is that you've got people engaging in a variety of ways, and what you need to do is provide a variety of ways for people to engage. Now that might sound really stupid because I've just reframed the question or the point, but actually if people are engaging in those different areas, that individual, so yeah, at an individual level, someone will have a tendency. Provide it to them, understand them, and this is where smarter systems come to play. So let's take content, or the type of content that you recommend, for example. Whenever someone logs into a platform, if the homepage or the landing page is the dashboard view, let's say, so they've got a common page that they always get to, serve up content to them in that page, for example. Speaking specifically about content here, not about what they navigate to on platform, but I'd be serving up content using a sophisticated AI, because that is factoring in their data that's captured via XAPI. It's looking at what they've gone through historically, and it's looking at where they need to go from a competency perspective or something along those lines. That's what I would be doing. I would be using the automated tools that have that XAPI data at a personalized level to push content. When you're talking about engagement, though, at let's say from the start, for the email or outreach or the comms piece that you have to your audience, the learning outreach, then I would say there will be trends. I have never seen a situation where there aren't trends within audiences, and the reason for that is because there's implied social norms. So we talked about the increase of use of Teams and Slack on the last stream. Teams and Slack might be where you go and push your content. That's where you might market it. And one of the things, the piece of information you get on those kind of platforms is what kind of engagement am I getting. So you know how many people have subscribed to that channel. That's the first piece. But you'd also know how many people put some sort of either comment or response, or potentially even an emotion or a reaction to it. So you can put like an emoji or something like that on there. We use that in our business all the time. So if there's a piece of content I stick up into, say, like Teams, and there is, it's around a topic area, and it's getting loads and loads of likes, that is a degree of engagement. What I'd want to do is map how many likes I have to how many people actually then go through and complete the training. That would be important to know. And if it's low, the number of people that go through it, there's a disconnect. But you would start to see those trends where people are congregating in certain areas in the comms piece, for example, or using it in certain ways. You would start to see those trends. But with the way that people go through content, you might not. And in that situation, you might just have to put it down to maybe the content doesn't gel for everybody, or it does in different ways. And the only way to really move around that is to provide a variety of options when it comes to consuming content. Video, podcasts, white papers, infographics, loads of different options, forums, wikis, FAQs, loads of options you've got to provide content in different ways. And that's where maybe, Phil, to your previous point, send out a survey. Do you like the content that we provide? Leave it open. It takes longer to process, but open-ended questions in surveys are hugely powerful. Encouraging people to provide actual responses that aren't, already categorized, or they're not pigeonholed into a specific response format, hugely beneficial if you're trying to capture honest information. It just takes longer to process, but with some keyword searching and things like that, you pretty quickly get to a point where you'd understand the kind of data you're getting from people. But that'll be how I go. Hopefully that answers the question. I'm conscious of time. We have, in theory, 10 minutes left on the stream, but if we want to use it. But I've given a lot of information here today, and what I don't want is to necessarily overly bombard people here. But what hopefully you've seen is that through the various stages of the process, you can capture data. It doesn't have to be hard; it can be simple, and there are systems outside of learning that can be really beneficial to doing it. One final point, as I mentioned at the start, is a continuous process, and I might even jump back to the Fosway screen here. Let's look at not knowing their customers. Measure on platform. What are people looking at? What are people searching for? What are people engaging with in the content or the comms pieces that you're providing, and looking at what they're doing from a business perspective. But don't just stop on all the other great stuff that you do from a business partnering perspective. I said that data for me is not always about ones and zeros. It's about the information you get from conversations, from proper business partnering, from consulting with the business proper. That is invaluable, and arguably, to me, I actually say in a lot of situations more beneficial. What the numbers and the data from the things we've been talking about today show is actually more a case of it's more monitoring what's happening as opposed to what people want, and what people want is still a really, really valid data source. Not thinking about how continuous learning really works, and again, this is about tracking what people are doing on platform, but this is understanding behavior. Again, doesn't necessarily just always have to be on platform. Look at it elsewhere. There are other systems that people use, other ways that people connect. But continuous learning, you need to be, to avoid the pun really, but you do also need to be continuously measuring. You need to be making sure that at various points in that learning journey, you are capturing information, whether it be verbatim comments in an interview format or data from a platform. The only way that you know that continuous learning is happening is by linking it up. And as I said, there's some pretty high tech ways you can do that now with other systems feeding into your learning system. And then finally, like we said, not focusing on measuring results. And results at the end of the day are beneficial to the management, they're beneficial to the business, but they're also beneficial to the individual, because if you can report back and say, look at what you've done, since going on this training, you've now reduced the time it takes you to do a job by 25%. That makes people feel good. It shows that individual that you've delivered value. That data exists, but I don't think it necessarily gets fed back too often to the learner. And what tends to happen is it's like, well, at a global or an organizational level, we see there's been an improvement. I went for this training and I feel like I'm better at my job. But actually, are you better at your job? And the individual, the learner there isn't always the one that's best equipped to maybe analyze that. And through access to the data that we have, we can do. So let's, communicate that back and continue that feedback loop and build the advocacy for what learning do. I'm going to finish on that point because I think it's quite a nice one. Any final questions, please post in the chat. I'll jump to the thank you screen now, but or the closing screen. Please post in the chat, comments below as well. Just in terms of like a roundup, we have there's a webinar that we have Laura Overton on later on in May, and for the life of me, I forgot what time it is, but it's in the description of this video. But we will please sign up to that webinar. It's gonna be great. It's kind of like we're refining the agendas all the time, actually based upon these streaming discussions. So, it's based upon what we've been talking about, but taking it further and probably going to a bit of, deeper detail. But would really appreciate people jumping on that webinar and contributing there. We've also got some more streams coming up. So next Tuesday, we've got a stream on the usual time at 10 o'clock with one of our, the head of our UX team here at Valamis. And the reason I wanted to get him on board was to help people understand how we go about, or how, what a UX designer does, and how they actually drive people to content and set the platform up so that the experience is the best that it can be and people don't feel, don't get turned off by what they're using. And it's a bit of a different focus. We're not focusing necessarily on the content itself in this situation, but you need good UX design to get people to the great content that we're all creating. So that's really, really good. And I'm glad that we're able to get that for you guys. And then also next week, I think I mentioned this in the last stream, We have a content creator coming on board who's bringing their customer who have had various challenges when trying to roll out training for in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, and they're going to talk about their planning that was taking place before, how COVID changed it, and what they're doing moving forward. So really interesting. That's insight from an actual L&D function itself, and a provider of content into it. So anybody joining that's Thursday, and again at the normal time at 10 a.m. GMT. So thank you everybody. Obviously stay safe as usual. Thank you for the comments today and watching the stream, and I will see you next Tuesday. Have a great weekend, guys. Bye.